there is this huge potential for women in the digital space, but it remains just that, a potential. Why? There's a huge digital gap, and this gap is enormous in least developed countries.
Hello, this is the Weekly Tradecast, a podcast brought to you by UNCTAD, the UN's trade and development body. I'm Sarah Toms. We're exploring how major events are shaping trade and development and how that affects billions of people around the world. To mark International Women's Day on the 8th of March, this episode of the Weekly Tradecast talks about women in the technology industry and why their success is so important to development. Many developing countries are seeking to close the digital divide and benefit from the online economy. Those benefits could be even bigger by also closing the gender divide. The UN says the exclusion of women from the digital world has cost low and middle-income countries at least $1 trillion in lost economic value in the last decade. As attitudes persist that technology is an industry mainly for men, the empowerment of all women and girls is the focus of the UN's theme for this year's International Women's Day, DigitALL, Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality. We're here now to talk about closing these divides and creating opportunities is Shamika Sirimanne, Director of UNCTAD'S Technology and Logistics Division. And before UNCTAD, she held senior positions in UN regional commissions in Asia and the Pacific and Africa. Shamika enjoys gardening and reading about the evolution of the human brain. Well, thank you for joining us today, Shamika. So tell me, why is the digital economy so important for women, and particularly women in developing countries?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. The potential for women in e-commerce and the digital economy is immense. But I say potential, so that's the key word. You see, the digital technologies present a new business model for women to reach out to new clienteles, new markets, and to grow business. And these technologies also allow women to run their businesses from home while raising a family or taking care of their families. And women face less discrimination in the digital sphere as opposed to a physical presence in a shop or an office, such as the cultural norms on women working and doing business, the time constraints they have, the mobility issues women have. On top of that, the digital economy is growing very, very fast. Our research at UNCTAD shows that global e-commerce, it's just one aspect of the digital economy, global e-commerce increased from $2 trillion in 2019, before COVID-19, and to 2.9 trillion in 2021, just in 2 years.
Wow.
And this is also an underestimation because a lot of countries do not have this data. So the main point is that the e-commerce is one of the fastest growing areas of trade and is also an enormously lucrative area.
There are challenges, aren't there? What challenges do women face in the education system and the technology industry?
So this is the crux of the matter. You see, while there is this huge potential for women in the digital space, but it remains just that, a potential for many women in developing countries. Why? There's a huge digital gap, and this gap is enormous in least developed countries. Only 20% of women have access to internet in these countries compared to 85% in developed countries. And even when women have access to the internet, they do not have the simple skills, the basic skills, ICT skills to operate an online business. Simple things like set up a platform to display their ware on these platforms and to reach out and to make an impact. So now another angle is when we talk about the skills, it doesn't help that women are not well represented in the STEM fields. I'm talking about the science, technology, engineering, and the mathematics field. And when we look at numbers, globally, only 35% of STEM students in higher education are women. This is globally, and it could be even worse in very poor setting. The data also shows that keeping women in STEM jobs is a challenge too, because there are a lot of biases in this whole STEM field, because it's a man's field, until recently. So we should not forget that these are on top of the many hurdles women businesses and women in general faced in the analog world. Now, such as getting a loan from a bank. It's much difficult if you're a woman. And then there are all these cultural biases keeping women down.
It's great to say that women need the skills, the funding, and the opportunities, as you said. But what needs to be done then, and who needs to do it, that we actually see the results we need to see?
There's no magic bullet. I think we all know the answers. They're very simple. But, they're very formidable too. Huh? Now, the very first one, the governments need to address the digital connectivity gap. Access to affordable internet is a must if you want to operate in the digital space. In my opinion, access to internet should be considered a citizen's right, just not a luxury. If you want, the world is going to be digital, and we are living through a digital technological revolution. To partake in this revolution, you need to have access to internet, and that has to be provided by governments. And the second is the education, preparing young people, especially girls, to capture these opportunities in the digital economy. We are talking about basic coding skills, basic digital skills. So you can set up your business, you can create a website, you can put your wares in the website, you can do your advertising. You can just simply operate on internet. So it's extremely important to provide these skills in schools and in technical schools. Getting girls into STEM fields and making sure that they remain in these fields is also a must. So this is, again, a responsibility for governments. It is extremely important to make sure women's voices are heard in policy-making circles. Digital policy, the education, financial policies, women-specific constraints need to be heard and internalized, and policies need to be made to address these concerns. This is why at UNCTAD, in our E-Trade for All Women initiative, we make sure women entrepreneurs have that interface with the policymakers in their countries. And policymakers hear women's concerns, women's specific constraints in operating in e-commerce and the digital sphere. It's important to lift up the profile of the successful business leaders, women leaders, because we also see that it can also fight deeply rooted stereotypes that hold women back. More successful women needs to be shown to the world and appreciated by all, admired by all, and that also help address these very, very deeply held biases of what women should do and what women shouldn't do.
What about places? Where do you see the future in developing countries could really take off with technology?
It's not just doing e-commerce around your town, but also doing e-commerce cross-border. For example, I would love to order tea from Sri Lanka, from the smallholder women run. I would like to go and order coffee from Ethiopia, from the smallholder farmers, and directly deliver to my home and cut out all the middlemen in the process so that the farmers can capture value at source. That's the power of this technology. That can be done. But you need all that intermittent conditions put in place, like the connectivity, the small amount of skills, the financing, all that, in these aspirations to be realized.
In honor of International Women's Day, which is why we're here, what advice do you have for young women, and perhaps those not so young, who want to make a career and a difference in the tech space?
I would say pursue, persist, and never give up. The sky is the limit.
That's a great note to end on, Shamika. Thank you so much to UNCTAD's Shamika Sirimanne for being this week's guest. Tune in to the Weekly Tradecast next week and every week for more insights on the most pressing issues around the world of trade and development. And there's even more on our website, unctad.org. I'm Sarah Toms in Geneva. Goodbye for now.